Andrew, great to see you, mate. We're sitting here in
Thank
Sydney.
you.
What are the big barriers that you see when you coach people in inspiring others and being enchanting? What are the most common barriers that you see?
I think one of the most important barriers is that people often think someone else's story is better than their own, or that someone else is better at telling the story than they are. And in fact, we're all great at telling stories. We do it every day. We do it with our families. We do it with our business colleagues. All the time we're telling stories. We're recalling what we've heard in the media, for instance. Often. We're even talking about the weather. We're telling stories constantly.
So you see storytelling as the best way to be enchanting and inspiring?
Yeah, story's a big idea, really. Story is something we talk about all the time as children. If we're lucky, we read them, but we observe them all around us every day. And so I think, really, a story can be whatever you want it to be. But the critical part about it is that you're engaged with it when you're telling it.
Now, storytelling is an old art. I mean, Jesus told stories. Everyone's told stories. Is it something that's as powerful as it used to be? Because we get a lot of messages through the media. We get them off the iPhones, you get them off the internet, you get them off the news, off the television. So a person today might get 100 times more stories in their lifetime than someone 50 years ago. Is it still as powerful as it was? More to the point, is it something that's really losing the impact given how much background noise there is today?
Well, I think it's become even more important.
More important?
Yeah, because what stands out for you amongst all the information overload, and in fact some research just out in the States into people's habits around their culture, and that's all sorts of culture, from going to the opera to listening to jazz to going to a museum to going to the movies. It's all in decline. But one thing is not in decline, and that's people reading. And that's reading in an 18 to 24-year-old age group as well. But
Reading
they're reading
is
online.
increasing.
Yeah, they're reading more. And they're reading more stories.
Reading online?
Yeah. So, the medium's changed, but the content, as we've often heard, is content is king, is still very much the case. So people are still, that figure is going up. So people might not be getting out and about more to some of the traditional outings that they might have done, and we know that's a bit of a worry that everyone's stuck in front of a screen. But put that aside, what they're taking notice of is stories.
Is it almost as if in this electronic world, what's actually counting is the person-to-person contact more so? Because we're also, what we actually really hunger for is some real human contact. Is that what's really happening?
I think it is, yeah, it's about relatedness. A great story is something you relate to. So the characters in it, the way that the story tracks from happy to sad, good to bad, rags to riches, is something we can all relate to. And it's the human element in it that is what we relate to in a story.
I know Seth Godin published his book, All Marketers Are Liars, and he talks a lot about telling stories there so that people believe you, because that was he puts it up as the only way that you can be authentic and actually gain trust by telling the story, because marketers make so many claims. Is that something that you've found to be true as well?
I think it's about authenticity. So storytelling can take a lot of forms. It doesn't have to be about a raconteur as a huge performer, a stagecraft where they just rock and roll on stage and they're a superstar. It doesn't have to be all about that. Some of the greatest stories are storytellers are really humble and unassuming, and you wouldn't notice them in a room. And yet when you hear them speak, they're compelling. And so I think it's about the authenticity. So if you've kind of learnt by rote, off by heart, a story, if you like, that actually doesn't have your heart and soul in it, and I might say heart, soul and guts, then it's not going to be effective, because you're not being genuine and you're not being authentic. So a key thing is to think about the intention behind your story. What's the result you want? Do you want to be liked? Do you want to look good? Do you want a result? Do you want to make a sale? Do you want to be remembered? So what is your intention going into it? And we've just seen recently at this conference that I've been at, an advertising campaign that owned the mistakes that a major corporation had made. So they built the ad campaign around the mistake. Now there's an authenticity to that, and it was compelling, and sales rocketed because they'd owned the error and they weren't trying to pretend and cover it up and go in a new direction. I think a lot of the Gen Y too spot a fake a mile away. So your story's got to be genuine, it's got to be heartfelt, and it's got to have a resonance for yourself before you share it. And that goes for whatever you're doing in sales. And we know that people aren't into a hard sell these days. They're not going to be convinced by advertising in its traditional way either. They want to hear what peers are saying. They want to share a story. The stories might be ones that several people have contributed to. So story collecting is as important as storytelling. And we're always collecting anecdotes. And it's, I think we have an issue sometimes with plagiarism and people stealing ideas. I think as long as you acknowledge where they come from and that you've been inspired by that story, we don't all have to go and climb Mount Everest tomorrow, but if we've heard a story about someone climbing Mount Everest and it relates to what we're trying to achieve and we're inspired by it, well, we can be a story collector and incorporate that into our own stories.